This is TWiT.
All right.
You ready?
Ready.
I'm going to reach over
ready.
my little glass. And I got Ned. Hi, Ned.
Ned's a hero in Australia.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to talk about who Ned Kelly actually is. No way to do
Is this like a breakfast whiskey that you're having? Is that what I'm seeing?
He looks at it. Apparently, I drink whiskey at all hours now these days. So
just trying to understand.
We're about to. Let me take you on this ride. It's a little nutty, and I didn't know going in how nutty it was going to be. So there's a company called Top Shelf International. There's two founders, Jason Redfern and Drew Fairchild. And they very much had a vision around the idea of making local alcohol products in Australia for Australia. In fact, they don't export Ned at all. So they right off the bat, both these guys have a background in the booze industry, mostly in marketing. So they knew how to brand and all of that sort of stuff. So they did the normal thing that non-alcohol manufacturers do. They made a contract with a company called Idle Wine, which is, you call it IDL, which has been around since the 1960s and does a lot of these custom beverage solutions and so forth. And the original project from TSI, from Top Shelf International, was these, what they call ready to drink. So they're actually prefab cans of whiskey cola, right? Just like your Jack and Coke, except already in a can. So by 2015, they're cranking out the ready-to-drink cans. They released their original versions on Australia Day and sell just in New South Wales, where I am right now, in Victoria, which is where Melbourne is. Like that, and they're based in their main facility now is in Campbellfield, which is in Victoria. In fact, they get that site in 2017 to build a distillery and actually they want to go complete vertical. So malt processing, so a brewery, the distillery, canning and bottling operations. They do the whole 9 yards. By 2018, they're actually producing. And then in 2019, they put out the first version of Ned. And yeah, as Leo caught on right away, this is the story of Ned Kelly, who's an absolute legend to Australians. And the challenge here was to summarize this in a reasonable length of time. So
I have to tell you, there have been 8 movies made about Ned Kelly. Oh, yeah, most recently, Heath Ledger.
Yeah.
But before Heath Ledger, Mick Jagger
Mick Jagger played Ned. Like, Ned's a big deal, right? So we got to go back to the origins of Australia, right? Edward Kelly, which was his name, they called him Ned, was born to his parents. His father, specifically John Kelly, was a transported convict. That was the term for it. He was an Irishman convicted of stealing pigs, whose punishment was to be sent to Van Diemen's Land, and we've talked about this before, that's Tasmania now, for a 7-year sentence. And he was let out a year or so early, and now you're in the colonies, right? It's the 1830s, and so he goes to work for a farmer in the Port Phillip district, that's now known as Victoria Province, and within a couple of years, he marries the farmer's daughter, a lady named Ellen. And has a bunch of children, as you do in the day. And Ned was actually the third child and the first boy. That part of the world in the 1850s experiences a gold rush. And so there's a fair bit of money flying around. And so even these, former transported criminals do pretty well, enough that they end up being able to buy a farm, except they don't buy a good farm because that whole process is pretty obsolete. So it doesn't grow particularly well. And this is also, the criminal part of Australia is winding down, but you do have this schism between the former convicts and family and the traditional colonists, the military, and so forth. In fact, one of the things that was going on, there was this idea that was called squatting, except the squatting was being done by the wealthy people. Like traditionally, we think of squatting as that's what the poor people do, is they squat on land. This was actually the wealthy farmers using crown land, mostly for livestock, that they didn't actually own, and then defending it. But because they were closely tied to the law, generally the law always fell on their favor. So you get this real schism between the sort of poor farmers trying to follow the rules and these wealthy folks. They, at one point, just before Confederation, they started calling it the squatocracy. Like it was that nuts. And of course, largely this ends in the early 1900s with Confederation and so forth. John Kelly, this is Ned's father, gets in trouble with the law as he's struggling to support his family. He's a heavy drinker, and eventually alcoholism kills him when Ned is 12 years old. Ned also gets into trouble as a teenager. He starts falling in with the Bush Rangers. And they're, again, very classic name for a group of robbers that live in the bush and then rob banks and trains and things like that. But they call them Bush Rangers, so somehow they're appealing. So fast forward to his early 20s, what they call the Fitzpatrick incident. This is in 1878. When Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick comes to the Kelly house to arrest Ned's younger brother, Dan, for theft of a horse. Then we don't really talk about whether he actually did it or not. That's secondary to the point. But there ended up being a confrontation, and the constable gets shot in the arm. Like, it's not fatal or anything, but he does get shot. And Ned and Dan flee to the bush to go hang with the Bush Rangers. And so the police's response is to arrest the mother, Ellen, and put her in jail for aiding and abetting, which really makes people angry. Like, you don't go around putting mothers in jail like that. And this begins this sense of persecution. I mean, the Kellys always felt like they were hard done by with the failure of the farm and those sorts of things. But that after Ellen is arrested, they form the Kelly Gang, which is these two Kelly brothers and several of their friends operating as Bush Rangers. And so they pay their bills, or they make their living essentially by robbing banks. And they're a little bit famous for that in the sense that they don't hurt anyone, right? They do their very best to almost be entertaining. They hold hostage while they get the money out, that sort of thing, and they do this fairly well. But of course, you keep going around robbing people, and folks get annoyed, and so a larger police force shows up. And the next major incident in Ned's life is the thing they call the Stringy Bark Creek incidents. And this is where a group of serious, police looking for criminals confront them, and it ends up in a shootout, and 3 of the police officers are killed. One of them escapes. Now, at the time, the Kellys argue that these police were not there to arrest them, they were there to kill them, and they were really fighting in self-defense. But this is when the colonial government declares them outlaws, which is a meaningful thing. When you're declared an outlaw, it means that anyone can kill you, and they will not be punished for it. In fact, they will be paid. They put out a bounty or reward on their heads. And anybody who is seen as assisting these outlaws is guilty of a crime as well. So, this is not that unusual at this time. I mean, this is the 1850s. Like, it sounds very Wild West, and it was very Dutch, that sort of thing. So why has Ned Kelly become so famous? Well, he keeps dictating letters that they get sent to the press and sent to the government and so forth. The most famous of this one is called the Gerald Airy letter, which is like 7,000 words. Like, this is a treatise. It's
kind of analogous to Bonnie and Clyde, though, right?
It's a little of that. We could throw a little Unabomber in here. I don't know. It's kind of nuts. Now, and the police kind of botch this, because after these things are going on, they do this big crackdown in the area, including arresting 30 people they think are sympathetic to the Kelly Gang, and never charge them with anything. They release quite a few after just a few weeks, but 9 of them are held for months without ever having a trial, without ever having evidence. So the whole local population is, if they weren't on board with the Kelly Gang, they kind of are now. Like, he's Robin Hood-like, although he's not certainly giving to the poor. He's just he's manifesting the frustration of the poor farmers of the area at the time. The reward thing gets out of hand. At one point, it's £8,000 for the kill or capture of the Kelly Gang, which is just an astronomical amount of money, the largest ever. And finally, we get to the Glen Rowan incident. And this is, again, you want to talk about legend and what they put into the movies. The Kellys get aware that there's now a train coming up from Melbourne with a lot of police officers, like professional hunter types, to come and get them. And so their goal was to derail the train. And they thought there was an informant, a guy named Aaron Sherritt, who they kill. And then they finally, as a confrontation, the scheme ultimately fails, and the police arrive in Glen Rowan. And this is when you discover that the Kelly Gang, the 2 brothers and the 2 others, have made armor out of old plowshares of the mold boards of the plows, helmet, chest piece, shoulder poltrons, down to their waist. And then there's this massive shootout. The other 3 are all killed in the shootout, ultimately. The armor only works so well. Ned is hit 18 times in his armor. And we know this because that armor is on display at the State Library in Victoria.
Wow.
But his legs aren't well protected, so he gets pretty chewed up in the legs, but he survives and is captured and treated for his wounds and then arrested and put on trial for murder. He pleads on guilty, talks about being a victim of the police and being persecuted, and he only ever acted in self-defense, but ultimately is sentenced to death by hanging. And he's 25. There's a huge petition that comes in the area, 32,000 signatures pleading for clemency, but they hang him anyway. And afterward, do an extensive investigation into the accusations of corruption and find a bunch of it that results in reprimands and demotions and suspensions and so forth. But also that investigation says that the police behaved appropriately to the Kelly's crimes. So there was nothing changed there. But they do release Ned's mother. And arguably part of that was to say, because the big concern here when Ned was killed was there's going to be a revolution, like it's going to get way worse. That's not actually what happens. They release Ned's mother and they clean up the police, so to speak, and sort of things calm down. So, by any definition, Ned is a criminal, but he's also this folk hero. And these saying things like the armor and stuff just make him a legend. So this whiskey, the funny thing about this whiskey is that it's very much an American style bourbon. It is corn, wheat, barley, but it was all about sort of tapping into this. And what was interesting about TSI, because most of the Australian whiskeys that we've ever talked about are very boutiquey, they're very batch. That is not what TSI went for. When they built their distillery in Campbellfield, they do the bourbon process, column still, rectifier, large scale. This is quite inexpensive. Like we usually talk about 500 ml bottles for 200 Australian dollars. This is 60 Oz. This is like $40. They've never published any specifications for how they make this stuff, just that it was a combination of Australian grains, being corn, wheat, barley, likely in that order. It is labeled as a sour mash, and just a reminder that means they take the spent mash from a previous distillation and put it into the fermentation batch, which lowers the acidity, or increases the acidity, lowers the pH, that's the sour part, which is good for the yeast, bad for lactobacillus and other things, so it sort of stabilizes the flavor and gives it a particular taste. And that should be the end of this story. I mean, shouldn't it? Ned whiskey, right? And it's, by the way, it's just basic bourbon.
They say it's Australian for bourbon.
Totally. And it's super drinkable, right? Like there's nothing offensive about this. It's nothing amazing. It's a very young whiskey, right? They haven't been around that long. But that first came out in 2019. And so 2020 is when they decide to go public, right, during the pandemic and so forth. And they also add a vodka to the line. They've really scaled up and done a good job. And then, I don't know, they go nuts. They decide they're going to make tequila. But of course, they're not allowed to call it tequila because that's a Mexico thing. So right. Agave spirit. So back in 2019, Drew Fairchild, which is the other co-founder at that time is the CEO, he has some relationship with this old experimental agave plantation in the northern Queensland, in Ayr. It was Belgian defunct. There was like 2,000 plants on it that were overgrown and unmaintained and so forth. But it was sort of proof. Blue agave, Weber agave, the stuff they normally make tequila from, will grow in Queensland. Although it's very different conditions. That's much more tropical, right? Like traditionally, Mexican tequila plants, like the blue agave, is grown at altitude. It's kind of deserty, dry things. Like when I was in Queensland in November, we did those show stuff. Like it was hot and humid. Like it's an intense environment. So in 2021, they announced this thing they call the Australian Agave Project. And they hire in a guy named Trent Fraser, who comes from Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy. He had actually built the tequila business for LVMH. The tequila we know is Volcan de Tierra, which is good tequila, no two ways about it, but made totally traditionally, no big deal. They acquire a massive plantation, 438 hectares. It's about 1,000 acres. They call the Eden Lassie plantation. Plant 50,000 agave plants with plans to go to 1 million. In fact, by 22, they have 500,000 agave plants growing. And again, traditionally in tequila biz, agave takes 5 to 7 years to mature. But one of the things they learned from the old Air plantation was that because it's so warm and so humid, the agave grows really quickly and sugars up quickly. Although I suspect they're doing a little cheating too, that they do an additional process to extract more sugars and things like that, so that they're able to get to a spirit fairly short order. So by 23, the old founder, Drew Fairchild, who started this madness, steps down so that Trent Fraser, the guy who made a tequila project before, is now running as CEO. It was presented as a planned succession, but okay. And in December, they actually opened the distillery. And again, they're going full vertical from plant to bottle. They're doing the whole thing, which is not the way traditionally tequila is done. The growers are very different from the process, is very different from the bottlers. They do the whole thing together. So by 2024, they released their first Blanco tequila. So 2 years, crazy fast. And they call it Act of Treason, which is hilarious, but because they're trying to make tequila, they're all the same tequila, right? Like nowhere, except they, when they're quoted or interviewed or anything, they go, agave, they use that for making tequila. We make an agave spirit. I don't know why they're so smitten with this idea. Climate lets it grow fast. They've got more sugar from it. They win awards for this Blanco, this fast-made Blanco, the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, which is no fooling, and the World Drink Awards, the sort of best new spirit and so forth. That's in 24. By September of 24, that publicly traded company known as TSI suspends trading for a restatement of finances. And apparently they had spent so much money getting all this started, they had not been paying their excise taxes. And so the Australian tax office basically orders them into receivership, although they battle back. So they owed millions of dollars in excise tax, the excise tax is what you pay every time you sell a bottle of booze, right? That's what it is. And they're fairly steep taxes. And so last year, by 2025, they actually sell off that Campbellfield facility, the thing that was making Ned Whisky and this whole operation. The deal was actually completed in May of 25 for $8 million, which is absurdly cheap. Now, again, this was all done in receivership. So 3.2 million of that is just straight the excise taxes. The ATO gets paid off. The other 4.8 is to other debts. But remember that IDL, who's the acquirer in this, had been making a bunch of product for them. So I wonder how much that money was already owed to IDL anyway, that they are able to buy the distillation operation in Campbellfield, which is very helpful for IDL. It allows them to expand their product lines. And part of that deal is they do continue to produce the TSI products. So the whiskey, the canned products, the tequila, and the vodka. But they don't buy everything. They just buy the production. Another company pops up called Blue Sky Drinks, and they buy the brands, again, working with IDL. What's never been sold and is still forced in receivership is the agave plantation. So that's just sort of hanging there while they sell this other product. But I did not pay. I saw thought, fun, I'll tell the story of Ned Kelly. Let's go talk about an inexpensive Australian whiskey, and then stumbled into this just crazy plan. Like, this is going to be a case study in overreach. This was a very successful company, done extremely well, and then they just tried to go for something so difficult that they burned every bit of their money up. Now, like I said, this is an inexpensive whiskey for Australia, right? It's $64 Australian, about 45 US. But I went and priced a bunch of booze in that price range. So you can go cheaper, like 50 Australian, and you'll get Bally's, Jim Beam, Canadian Club, Bell's, even Maker's Mark is only $50 Australian down here for the 700 ml bottle. For the same price for what you would pay for a bottle of Ned, you can get a bottle of Monkey Shoulder or Johnny Walker or even Glenlivet. And if you want to spend a little bit more, now you're in the range of Woodford Reserve, Famous Grouse, or even Lefroy is like 72 Australian dollars. So there's a reason they're not trying to export this in any way. This is an Aussie whiskey for people who want to drink an Aussie whiskey. And so it's priced roughly in that range. If you care about, if you don't care about where your whiskey comes from, you just want the best stuff, I don't know that you're going to pick this. It definitely bats at the same level as a Monkey's Shoulder, without a doubt. I would argue that Maker's Mark is better than them all by a non-trivial amount and costs less. I don't know what's going to happen to TSI. This is kind of a sad story. Because of tequila, because admittedly, if they pulled it off and basically made a new class of agave spirit made in Australia, okay, that could be huge. And it might still be. I think somebody's going to pick this up at some point and just see the value in it and the opportunity there. But it's just a nutty booze story, like such a strange industry to have jeopardized everything to do this agave thing.
Lose your shirt. And a fake tequila.
Well, more importantly, lose other people's shirts, right? Yeah. This is a publicly traded company on the ASX. So, yeah. And it's been in receivership ever since. So if you own stock in TSI, you've not been able to sell it since 2024. It's been locked up.
Now, I think Paul, given his appreciation of peanut butter whiskey, might enjoy their Golden Bicky flavored Aussie whiskey.
Yeah, this is a liqueur, actually.
Oh, yeah, it's a liqueur.
So it's more
like cookies.
quaffable.
It's more quaffable. And it tastes like cookies.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, that's almost the same price as the whiskey. That's for a liqueur, that's very pricey.
Yeah.
But,
cookie flavored liqueur.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Bicky is a very Aussie word for biscuit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I always enjoy telling craft stories, right? Of a group of guys that used to make whiskey for other people decide we should make our own, and they do that little craft thing. That is not this story. This is a story of business people trying to make the business of whiskey. They find a niche without a doubt, and then they go off the rails.
So what was it that caused them to lose their shirt? Was it the farm?
Just the sheer amount of money it takes to start an agave operation from beginning to end. They had to build another processing facility because the processing of peanuts is totally different. They had to set up that entire farm, and then they overscaled it. What are you doing planting 500,000 agave plants?
Another victim of Mexico's booming economy.
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess it's also because they can't charge enough in Australia. It sounds like Australians don't like to pay for their liquor.
Well, this stuff gets expensive. Like,
right.
We were talking about like Harmony and like those very fancy craft spirits that are $200 Aussie dollars for a 500 ml.
Yeah.
What I loved about Ned is the contrast. Traditional size bottle, very reasonable price, relatively speaking, for an Aussie made product. Like, they had a winner here. I hope it survives. It's just going to have to be under a different ownership. Is the moment where, they're sort of in flux. But the brands have been locked up. Like, it's legit. And it's fine. Nothing wrong with it. If you've got an urge to drink whiskey at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday.
You lost me at the 6 o'clock in the morning.
Excellent choice. Really.
I was like, I do have an... Oh, wait, what? I have an urge to be asleep at 6 o'clock in the morning.
No, that's not how my day is going to go.
No, it is not.